Hello and welcome. Have you ever stopped to wonder how the world agrees on the price of, well, anything? From your morning coffee to the phone in your hand, there's this powerful, almost invisible force at play. In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and see exactly how it works.
So let's start with this simple question. Think about a basic t-shirt. Who decides what it costs? Is it the company that stitched it together? The store that puts it on the rack? Or is it you, the person who decides whether or not to buy it? Who really gets the final say?
Here's a quick look at where we're headed. We're going to start with this great price mystery, then meet the two main characters, demand and supply. We'll see how they find a perfect balance, what happens when things shake up that balance, how governments try to get involved, and finally, we'll get to the bottom of this whole invisible hand thing.
Okay, let's dive into part one, the great price mystery. You see, at the heart of every single purchase, there's a fundamental tension, a conflict, really.
On one side, you've got us, the consumers. We make up the demand. And what do we want? A bargain. We want to pay as little as possible. But on the other side, you have the producers, the folks who make up the supply. They've put in the work, and they want to sell for the highest price they can get. These two groups are pulling in completely opposite directions.
So, how does a price ever get set? Well, there are some natural limits. For you, the consumer, the absolute maximum you'll pay is based on its utility, which is just a fancy way of saying how useful or valuable that thing is to you. For the producer, the absolute minimum price is what it costs them to make it. They can't go lower without losing money. The final price has to land somewhere in that zone between what it's worth to you and what it costs to make.
All right, section 2. It's time to properly introduce the two forces that battle it out to find that final price: demand and supply.
So there's this magic moment in a market, and it's called equilibrium. Seriously, it's the sweet spot. It's that perfect point where the number of t-shirts people want to buy is exactly the same as the number of t-shirts sellers want to sell. No leftovers, and nobody goes home empty-handed.
Let's look at how this actually works with some numbers for our t-shirts. Check out the table. If the price is 500 rupees, sellers are excited. They're ready to supply 56,000 shirts. But buyers, not so much. They only want 30,000. That's way too many shirts, an excess supply, and that's going to force prices down. Now flip it. At 100 rupees, everybody wants a cheap shirt. But the sellers, they're not making enough money to bother. That creates a shortage or excess demand, which pushes prices up. And right there in the middle, at 300 rupees, boom, 45,000 demanded, 45,000 supplied. That's our equilibrium.
And here's what that looks like as a picture. That downward sloping blue line, that's the demand curve. See how as the price drops, the quantity people want goes up? And the upward sloping red line is the supply curve. As the price rises, sellers are willing to make more. That exact spot where they cross, point E, that's it. That's our handshake moment. That's market equilibrium.
So the key thing to get here is that the market is always trying to fix itself. If there's a surplus, too much stuff on the shelves, prices have to fall to get rid of it. If there's a shortage, not enough to go around, prices will rise because people are willing to pay more to get what they want. It's this constant dance, always pushing back towards that equilibrium point.
Okay, moving on to section 3. So we've found this point of balance, this equilibrium. But here's the thing, the world doesn't stand still, right? What happens when something changes? A new fashion trend, a breakthrough in technology? Let's see how the market reacts.
So, let's say a huge celebrity is suddenly spotted wearing our t-shirt, and now everybody has to have one. That's a massive increase in demand. What happens is the entire demand curve literally shifts to the right. And look, the new place where the curves cross, E1, is at a higher price and a higher quantity. The market found a new balance, just like that.
Now, let's try another scenario. What if a new type of sewing machine is invented that makes it way cheaper and faster to produce t-shirts? That's an increase in supply. This time, the supply curve shifts to the right. And our new equilibrium? It's at a lower price, but a higher quantity gets sold. The market adjusts again. And this is the part that's so cool to understand. When demand for that celebrity t-shirt shot up, the whole demand curve shifted. But the suppliers, they didn't have to change their entire business model. They just moved along their existing supply curve to meet that new higher price. It's a dynamic give and take.
Section 4. So far, we've seen how the market, left to its own devices, finds a price. But what happens when an outside force, like the government, steps in and decides to set the price instead?
First, let's talk about something called a price ceiling. This is a law that basically says you cannot charge more than this specific price for this item. Think about things like rent control in some cities. And for this to do anything at all, it has to be set below what the natural market price would be.
And this graph shows you exactly what happens. The market wants to be at that equilibrium price, P0, but the government forces the price down to P2. Well, at that super low price, demand goes through the roof. But suppliers look at that price and say, no thanks, and they cut back production. The results? A massive shortage. You see that big gap labeled excess demand?
Now let's look at the opposite, a floor price. This is a minimum price. It's a law that says you cannot sell for less than a certain amount. You often see this with agricultural products to help farmers, or with the minimum wage to help workers.
So here, the government sets the price floor at P2, way above the natural equilibrium. At this artificially high price, suppliers are thrilled. They start producing a ton of product. But buyers, they're not so excited about the high price, so they buy less. And the predictable result is a huge surplus, a ton of stuff left over with no one to buy.
And that brings us to Section 5. As we've just seen, these interventions, while they might have good intentions, they have consequences. Very predictable ones. So let's just quickly sum up what happens when you try to control prices.
Price ceilings create shortages, right? And that often leads to things like rationing or long lines, and sometimes even illegal black markets where people sell the item for a much higher price anyway. Price floors, on the other hand, create surpluses, and someone has to deal with all that extra stuff. Often it's the government that ends up buying and storing it all.
Which brings us all the way back to where we started. Who decides the price of that t-shirt? And the answer, it turns out, is no one. Not a single person. It's not the company's CEO. It's not a government official. It's not even you by yourself. The price just emerges from the millions of individual decisions made by buyers and sellers, all looking out for themselves. This is what the economist Adam Smith famously called the invisible hand of the market.
And that's our final section, the market's invisible hand. The mystery is solved. The price isn't dictated by some person in a boardroom. It's discovered by the constant, relentless push and pull of supply and demand. This whole mechanism is everywhere. It's why plane tickets cost more during the holidays. It's why strawberries are cheaper in the summer. It's at work in your local farmer's market and on the global stock exchange. These forces are constantly, quietly guiding everything. So the real question for you is, now that you know how to see the invisible hand, where are you going to spot it next? Thanks for watching.